Maintenance of Way Employees Division, International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Don Grissom, Assistant General President of Brotherhood of Railway Carmen Division, TCU and IAM. And Mr. Grady Cawthon, retired Transportation Policy Consultant. And Mr. Nathan Bachman, Vice President of Sales and Business Development, Lorem Technologies Incorporated. Ms. Cindy Sanborn, Chief Operating Officer, Norfolk Southern Corporation, and Chair of the Association of American Railroad
Sanborn. But she is sorry, man.
Committee. And Mr. Jeremy Ferguson, President, Sheet Metal Air Rail Transportation Division.
Yeah, that's a man. You to you.
Us today, and I look forward to your testimony. Without objection, our witnesses' full statements will be included in the record. Since your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee requests that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. Mr. Morrison, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Payne, Ranking Member Crawford, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Roy Morrison, Director of Safety for the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the Teamsters. BMWD represents more than 30,000 railroad workers who do inspection, construction, maintenance, and repair of tracks, roadbeds, bridges, structures, and facilities on railroads. BMWD members have raised these issues as the most pressing.
What's going on, little gaming?
Precision scheduled railroading has produced historical record profits and historically low staffing levels in the railroad industry. Before COVID, employment on Class 1s was cut by over 30,000. And during COVID, employment has been cut by thousands more. Now, even as traffic is returned, staffing levels have not. Maintenance of way employees are working over 80 to 100 hours a week doing track maintenance on multiple territories for months on end. While railroads refuse to fill open positions and continue furloughs, prior to PSR workforce cuts, BMWD commissioned an occupational safety and
you gotta do what you gotta do, man.
By highly credentialed medical and
academic
research.
Yes, Texas is live right now.
Expertise in workplace safety and health. The full study is available on BMWD's website. But the key finding of our study is that our members face significantly higher levels of disease.
This is the rail safety hearing.
Industries. Severe understaffing is only making these issues worse. Additional maintenance away forces and more stable work schedules would provide some relief. With my written testimony, I've shared letters from our members about current conditions where they're pressed to cut corners, defer maintenance, skip steps, and not to work to standards they were trained to and met prior to PSR. We ask the committee to continue to stay on top of the issue and take further actions to mitigate damages caused by PSR. Starting in 2018,
that's true, Jay.
Class 1 railroads began test programs referred to
and I'll fix it, Jeremy.
Track inspection. But it's not new. ATI is just autonomous track geometry measurement systems, which have been in use since the 1970s. And were never designed for FRA mandated track inspections. But waivers submitted to FRA show the railroads want to cut human track inspections by up to 80%.
Wow.
Even though there are defects the machines cannot detect. What ATI can do is identify track geometry defects, which make up about 26% of the total defects FRA requires to be inspected for. Human track inspections, taking human track inspectors off the tracks leaves 75% of track defects unmonitored. Railroads can add all the technology they want without safety waivers. The track geometry systems are already used on Amtrak at the frequencies the freight railroads have tested. Amtrak doesn't need safety waivers to do this. No railroad does. It's vital to the safety of rail employees and the public that manual in-person inspection frequencies remain at the current levels mandated by federal regulation. Recently, the AAR has complained that FRA is not rubber stamping requests to reduce human inspections. The AAR is wrong. FRA should scrutinize these waiver requests, and Congress should make it clear that the FRA has your support. I wanted to note BMWD greatly appreciates Administrator Bose. My testimony is not meant to be critical of him or the work he's doing at FRA. We're just highlighting several issues that have gone unresolved across multiple administrations. BMWD thanks to NTSB for including roadway worker safety on its
Mic
agency's
off.
21-22 most wanted list. We also asked Congress to elevate 49 CFR 214-329 from regulation to statute. The regulation requires provisions of warning equipment such as whistles, air horns, white discs, red flags, lanterns, or fusees to provide warning of oncoming trains, but the class ones just make roadway workers yell over the noise, and FRA has ignored our request for stricter enforcement. The punitive damage standard for retaliation against whistleblowers is the exact same as the standard to disqualify railroad managers, but our efforts to get FRA to follow through have been ignored for years. Failing to penalize managers encourages retaliatory conduct. We just ask existing regulations be enforced against bad actors. Accepted track regulations permits railroads to designate track as exempt from compliance with minimum safety requirements. It was meant to provide short-term regulatory relief 40 years ago, but railroads use it to cut costs and avoid maintenance. The 2020 NTSB report said of a worker fatality in Arlington, Texas, quote, contributing to the accident was the designation of accident track as accepted track under current FRA safety standards, which allowed inadequate track conditions to exist on track used regularly, end quote. Congress should sunset accepted track. I'd like to thank you for our opportunity to raise these concerns. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
That's nuts. Here's a link to the actual live stream in case
And
me
next we'll
talking
have
or anything is
Mr.
getting
Grissom
annoying.
for 5 minutes.
Yeah, being as it is, it's live right now.
Chairman Payne, Chairman Defazio, Ranking Member Crawford.
This is the man,
and
Mr.
members
Grissom.
of
He
the
was a
subcommittee.
car man.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the important
I've talked
issue
about him
of freight
before.
rail safety. My name is Don Grissom, and I'm a 41-year railroader, currently serving as the Assistant General President of the Brotherhood Railway Carmen, a division of Transportation Communications Union and TCU-IAM. Our members inspect, maintain, and repair rail cars on our nation railways. I'm here today to speak about the difficulty of the Carmen craft and how recent changes to the railroad business model
she's there,
has
Texas.
increased
Sanborn.
pressure from
She's there.
management and have created
Miss
a
Sanborn.
disaster waiting to happen. First, let me emphasize that these Carmen jobs are skilled positions. Upon hiring, a Carmen apprentice spends 732 working days, 6 different 122-day phases to become a journeyman. During this time, a Carmen becomes highly skilled at inspecting and repairing rail cars. And why freight cars may appear simple, the mechanics of a freight car is quite complex and includes air brake systems, brake assemblies, wheels, draft gears, yokes, couplers, handholds, and other safety appliances.
I've replaced all those.
All which is required to be in working order per federal regulation for a train to operate safely. Like other crafts, Carmen have been cut to the bone in the PSR era. We have lost anywhere from 15 to 30% of our craft, depending on the railroad. And since PSR, it amounts doing less with less or moving fewer carloads with fewer employees. And the effect on the Carmen is one of the consistent and sustainable pressure on employees. Pressure not to inspect or repair rail cars. Pressure to turn a blind eye to AAR and FRA defects. Pressure to work so much force overtime that your body becomes dangerously fatigued.
Love to hear
This
this.
is the life of a Carmen in the PSR era. It is the only career I'm aware of where they train you to do a job and they fire you when you do it. Please remember, one
truth.
defective rail car
The
can
truth.
derail an entire train. Since each car has up to 90 inspection points per car per side, or 180 in total, Carmen were allowed around 3 minutes per car on inspection. That's until the PSR era. Today, in most locations, on all the Class 1, Carmen are only allowed 1 minute for inspection, and I provided evidence in my written statement. As a result, cars often go uninspected, even if they are found defective, If the car was still rolled down the track, management tells them to send it out, regardless of whether the brake system or other critical components are in working order. All of this is due to the pressure that applied to local management and workers to do whatever it takes to get the train out. In August of 2021, the FRA performed a safety audit on the UP. Unfortunately, we heard reports that local management was given a heads up so they could sweep all the defects under the rug, and the FRA still found defective cars. We continue. We also encourage the FRA to pay special attention to yards where carmen have been fully removed from the property. A list of those yards is included in my written
Not really, Mike. I'm just
statement.
kind of listening.
Finally, some attention has been paid to railroad workers on fatigue issues in the industry, but not enough. As note today, carmen are being forced to work overtime consistently. Many reports of forced overtime include 16-hour shifts, 5 to 6 days in a row. Many of our members sleep in their cars between the shifts so they can get an extra hour or 2 hours of rest instead of wasting time commuting home and back. This is not a healthy environment. A wise colleague of mine said to me, the railroads are burning the candle at both ends. They're burning their customers on one and burning out their employees on the other.
It's
Thank
by
you for this
design.
opportunity to testify.
That's by design, in my opinion, because
Thank you, sir.
we all know what they want.
Next, we have Mr. Cawthon.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss railroad safety. I'm here as an individual, having retired from FRA in 2010, after a total of 36 years in the agency, 2 decades of which were as a senior executive working on railroad safety policy issues, and including a stint as Associate Administrator for Safety. I concluded my term as Deputy Associate Administrator for Safety Standards. My prepared statement provides some detail, but let me make 3 points very directly, focusing for today on the management of in-train forces. You heard Administrator Bowes refer to that, and Mr. Chapman referred to that. First, the immense progress that the railroads had made in safety over the past few decades has stalled out. Further progress has been arrested by the railroad's commitment to one form or another of so-called precision schedule railroading. One of the features of PSR as implemented has been the use of very heavy and long trains, often marshaled without adherence to train makeup principles based on research and experience. Technology has sometimes been underutilized. At other times, technology has been applied beyond its demonstrated capacity. The result has been a succession of embarrassing and dangerous accidents that need not have occurred. These are often characterized as human factor accidents, with the implication that employees just made mistakes. But for the most part, they are organizational accidents driven by management decisions. Other accidents involving management of in-train forces are being reported as equipment-related, but many equipment failures have resulted from excessive draft and buff forces in poorly assembled trains.
Yeah, trailing tonnage is a real thing.
Second, the problem will not solve itself. Investors are demanding huge payouts in the form of stock buybacks and dividends. PSR is designed to deliver cash to the bottom line. The Congress and FRA need to place countervailing pressure on the railroads through tough but flexible safety regulations. Very likely, FRA cannot do it alone, given the propensity of industry to seek shelter or just endless delay in the excruciating regulatory process and the increasingly business-friendly federal courts. Congress needs to provide direction. Third, it's important for us to raise our eyes above the current morass and consider the future of rail technology. Today's braking technology was conceived in the 1870s, and it still has inherent limitations. We need electronically controlled pneumatic brakes, ECP brakes were developed by the AAR and
Say that's a bad
suppliers
idea, but I don't
in the
know.
1990s, were authorized for use in selected revenue service under waivers that I signed, and then they were authorized and incentivized by regulations that we issued in 2007. At that point, the momentum died. When FRA and PHMSA tried to apply ECP brakes to high-hazard unit trains, the railroads fought it, even though most of the costs would have been paid by shippers and most of the benefits would have flowed to the railroads. We need a legislative mandate for FRA to move forward with the phased implementation of ECP brakes. The railroads will not protect their own future so long as the goal is short-term profitability. This is the fact. When lavish returns on investment will not be realized within the tenure of current railroad managements, investment will be deferred. Positive train control took a legislative mandate and 35 years to get done. In the case of ECP brakes, progress has already been deferred for over 2 decades. Mr. Chairman, to provide a better explanation of this complex topic, I've provided the committee, in addition to my prepared statement, with my white paper on management of in-train forces, which is now in its 3rd revision. It could also be found at the Railway Age website. I look forward to any questions the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
ECP train
you,
I used to
sir.
work on,
Now we'll have
it
Mr.
caused
Bachman
BN guys a lot
for
of
5
problems.
minutes.
But I'm sure those problems
Good
will be
morning,
buffed
Chairman
out.
Payne, Ranking Member Crawford, and members of this esteemed subcommittee. My name is Nate Bachman, and I am the Vice President of Sales and Business Development at Loram Technologies, Inc., LTI. Based out of Georgetown, Texas, we are a division of Loram Maintenance of Way.
BNSL or UP?
In addition,
BN.
I serve on the Executive Committee as the Secretary Treasurer of Railway Engineering Maintenance Suppliers Association, REMSA, a national trade association that represents companies that manufacture rail maintenance of way equipment and provide related services. I am honored to join this distinguished panel today and to provide our perspective on the important topic of freight rail safety. I'll first begin by commending Congress for the passing of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The IIJA provides visionary and unprecedented levels of funding for key rail safety programs. While Loram Technologies is just one business within REMSA, the rail supply segment of the industry has a significant economic footprint. Railway suppliers directly employ more than 125,000 people in manufacturing, repair,
What's going on, Emilio?
maintenance, and leasing, among others. In addition to my role on the REMSA board, LTI is also a proud and active member of the National Railroad Construction and Maintenance Association, the NRC, and the American Association of Railroads. Both at LTI specifically and in the entire rail supply and contracting industry, safety is our #1 priority. We work as a company and industry to continually improve safety performance. In our experience,
Battery low.
the most successful work environment is one where technology, such as automated track inspection, can complement the work on the ground to both augment and improve safety for workers and the railroads.
Yeah, I got to
That is
leave
what
here in 15 minutes.
That is precisely what this technology does today.
In 15, 20
To
minutes.
be clear, the intent of this technology is not to replace workers. Before LTI and other companies developed these solutions, track inspections were both labor and time intensive. This technology can detect tiny defects invisible to the human eye while enabling railroads to inspect up to 8 times as much
Mic
track
off.
in a given day. By targeting visual inspections through the use of data-driven technology, we can reduce redundant
Mic
manual
on.
inspections, which both enhances greater roadway worker safety and allows for an approach whereby track workers' inspection time can be dedicated to and prioritized around the most pressing track defects. Loram Technologies utilizes proprietary state-of-the-art imaging technology which scans the track to reveal the exact condition of every railroad tie and the associated components along the way. It pinpoints any potential problems and marks their exact location so that the railroad can target and repair them in an efficient manner. This technology finds flaws manual detection methods may miss, and it does so while traveling at speeds up to 25 miles per hour. According to the FRA, track-related issues caused 1/4 to 1/3 of all train accidents from 2001 to 2020. The use of automated track inspection technologies paired with visual inspections has helped to drive down this number considerably.
Yeah.
We encourage Congress and the FRA to
I
work
would be a little nervous
collaboratively
also.
to promote rail technologies that enhance safety in the industry. We believe that the waivers that the Class 1 railroads have requested for continuing their ATI pilot programs put safety first and should be continued. More data from continued pilots benefits rail workers, rail suppliers, railroads, the FRA, and the general public. This combination of data-driven findings from ATI technology and the visual inspections made by workers on the ground should be a powerful force in moving the rail industry forward. Thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's pretty cool.
Thank you, sir. And next,
So he worked for the company that does the track inspections. He's basically saying, you know,
Chairman,
oh, there's the
Mr.
idiot right here.
Ranking Member and distinguished
He was saying this technology wasn't made to take jobs.
Norfolk Southern and the approximately 630 other freight railroads operating in the United States form an integrated system that provides the world's safest,
Nugget tars, but this
most
right here
productive,
might
and lowest
help.
cost freight
I have a
rail
video I was going to post, but I
service. U.S.
can't because I
freight
got
railroad
stuck on this. I'm
industry
going to post
is
it
an
tomorrow.
irreplaceable national
But,
asset
Oberman-
that enhances our
Oberman
nation's
made
standard
some-
of living
made
and its
some comments.
competitiveness in the tough global economy. The U.S. rail system owes its success to a lot of different factors, but in my opinion, a key ingredient is our dedicated workforce. Railroading is a tough, demanding job. The men and women of Norfolk Southern put their boots on every day and work hard to safely and efficiently serve our customers.
False.
It's no exaggeration to say that the railroad couldn't operate without them, and I'm grateful that they have chosen to pursue a career in this important industry.
Yeah, Norfolk Southern's under the gun
Railroading
a
the
million.
relentless pursuit of safe operations is not optional. It's a business imperative. We have an obligation to operate safely for the benefit of our employees, our customers, and the communities where we operate. And while we have not yet reached our ultimate goal of 0 accidents and injuries, we are making significant progress. The overall train
This is a
accident
live
rate,
stream right now,
employee
but I'm
injury
gonna be
rate,
sure and make
and
another
grade
video
crossing
breaking it down.
collision rate have all fallen substantially since the year 2000. Railroads today have lower employee injury rates than most other major industries, including trucking, airlines, agriculture, mining, manufacturing, and construction, even lower than grocery stores.
Hang on, get tars.
These results are driven by the industry's sustained investment in its infrastructure,
I'm gonna copy and
development of
paste
safety
something that Oberman
technologies,
said.
and the modernization of operating and maintenance practices. But the most important factor in achieving continuous safety improvement is the creation of a company culture that promotes safety through behavioral changes. Railroads work very hard to train their employees and instill in them a high level of safety awareness in
So this is what
everything they do.
Oberman said to
They are
the
among
Big
the
Four.
nation's most frequent recruiters of
I can only
veterans,
post so much
whose
of it.
discipline and training are a good fit within a high-performing safety culture. The federal government can also have significant impact on the freight transportation
that-
sector's
here's a
ability
link.
to achieve positive safety outcomes. It is essential that when the government enacts laws or regulation, it keeps in mind the impact on safety of the nation's
That's the
entire
link to
transportation
the
system.
to the article.
Taking an evidence-based, holistic view of the whole transportation ecosystem is vitally important to creating national safe transportation policy that works for all stakeholders and delivers continuous improvements in safety. Regulation of crew size is a subject where I think the federal government would benefit from taking this approach.
Really?
Legislation and
Wonder why.
regulations have been considered that would mandate that all Class 1 freight trains must operate with 2 employees in the locomotive cab. Yet there is no evidence that trains with 1-person crews have accidents at a higher rate than trains with 2-person crews.
Oh, here we go.
While it wouldn't enhance safety, there is one thing a crew size regulation would accomplish. It would make railroading less competitive against other modes of transportation
Wrong.
who do not face similar operational restrictions. Imposing a minimum crew size mandate on railroads would undermine the policy goals of promoting safer, more environmentally sustainable freight transportation.
She's so full of
Federal
shit,
government
man.
also
I'm
has an
sorry.
important role to play in encouraging, or at least not discouraging, the development of safety-enhancing technology. One recent technological innovation with demonstrated safety benefits is automated track inspection technology. In cooperation with FRA, we developed a test to find the optimal mix of automated and manual track inspections. On every single metric tested, the automated system increased track safety and quality, even as the frequency of manual inspections was reduced. This system was able to detect defects that were imperceptible under visual inspection, while human inspectors were able to concentrate on making track repairs and finding defects in switches, crossing diamonds, and other areas that the automated system could not evaluate. Despite these impressive results, The FRA recently denied our request for a waiver that would have allowed the same combination of automated and manual inspections everywhere on Norfolk Southern system. At NS, our goal is to provide a customer experience that is safe,
Yeah, William, you're
efficient,
right.
and as
You're right.
cost-effective as possible. But this can't happen without technology.
They turn it
We are
in, they
concerned
just tell you
that
to
FRA
turn
is
the
not
blind
doing
eye. Don't
everything
pay
it can
attention
to
to it.
support the development of technologies such as automated track inspection systems that have actually been shown to work. We respectfully urge policymakers at all levels to be proactive, collaborative partners with railroads to meet our ultimate goal of zero accidents and injuries. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I'll be glad to take your questions.
So
Thank you.
basically, Norfolk Southern
now
just doubled down on the one-man crews. So they just doubled down on one-man crew. Man, that's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Thank you for
Here we
allowing
go. Let's listen to the UTU
the
man.
opportunity to testify.
This is the president of Mr. Ferguson.
I took office in October of 2019. In my first 15 months as president, there were 12 rail transportation worker fatalities. In fact, at one point, within that period, the railroad suffered a fatality and at least one amputation every month for 9 months straight. Today, very little has changed for the better. Undoubtedly, the railroads will have a message of an industry on the mend, but please be rest assured that nothing can be further from the truth. For the last 10 years, the railroads have averaged 8 fatalities per year. Last year, there were 9, and while there may be brief lulls of those types of events, the data reveals a steady, consistent, and frightening trend. Currently, the rail carriers are hell-bent on risking further injury to their employees, as well as the American public and supply chain infrastructure
Bingo.
by reducing or eliminating altogether the 2 crew members that control
Bingo.
train movement in the cab of a locomotive.
Hell yeah.
They will tell you that it is a matter of collective bargaining and that there is no data to support otherwise. I say to you, please do not be swayed. Safety is not, nor should it ever be, negotiable. I assure you, accidents are occurring on short lines and yard jobs that operate with less than a 2-person crew, but the rates and/or trends cannot be identified because the information is not captured. Similarly, all Class 1s over-the-road railroad operations are performed with no less than a 2-person crew today, so there is no other data to compare. In other words, the railroads have no idea what will happen if they reduce crew size, but it's a gamble they're willing to take for the sake of satisfying their insatiable appetite of improving their company's bottom line.
Truth.
What we do know from the data that we do have is that things are getting worse. A quick look at years 2020 through 2021 reveal an increase in total accidents and incidents from 8,792 to 9,192, and an increase in total employee injuries from 2,961 to 3,054. Make no mistake, it's railroad greed that I believe has caused this committee to call us here today. As you are aware, PSR was born from the pressure put forth by investors and shareholders on Wall Street. Since its advent, dramatic, haphazard cuts have decimated railroad resources. Approximately 33% of the Class 1 workforce was laid off more than a year before the first case of COVID had ever been identified. Locomotives were put in storage, and integral crafts with special skills that were relied upon to perform safety-critical inspections were eliminated from terminals across the country. Looking to the future, the trajectory for rail safety is alarming, especially if PSR continues with its status quo. Employees fortunate enough to have not been affected by the cuts are now voluntarily walking away from what was once the premier blue-collar job in the nation. As a result, the institutional knowledge the carriers are letting walk out the door will threaten rail safety for another generation to come. Exasperating this issue is the railroad's panic-driven effort to stop the PR nightmare they are currently facing for their majority contribution to the supply chain crisis. Included in this panic is the slashing of training programs for new hires so that the railroads can portray an improving number of workers, when in reality, all they are actually doing is providing the trainees with a deficient training program and a foundation built for failure. This is evidenced by multiple amputations and crushing injuries recently occurring to newly promoted conductors. Notably, FRA accident report measurements do not reflect amputations. They are reported the same as most any other injury. This needs to change. Also, A specialized study of the dangers in switching operations is warranted by the NTSB. The NTSB has never performed one of those specialized studies on switching operations, and now is the time, as most fatalities and amputations have occurred in the performance of switching operations. Compounding troubles in the rail industry is the fact that train lengths are growing, and so are the number of major derailments, each one another step closer to the inevitability of the big one. Also increasing are the number of block crossings, the outcry from public commuters, and the stories of first responders not being able to get to their destinations, while the victims, dependent upon their timely response, perish on the other side of the train. Long trains are also making very difficult work for the crews. Radio communications are insufficient for the lengths of the trains.
John, this is the
Conductors
president of the
and
UTU,
engineers
and he's
regularly
smart,
lose
Mr.
the ability
Ferguson.
to communicate, often stranding them from a cry for help or a much-needed train movement instruction to ensure the safest course. Long trains also expose our members to the elements for periods of time that would be unacceptable by OSHA and other industries, but somehow are permissible in rail.
Please wrap up.
In closing, I would like to say this. I am on record as having said that the railroad industry is going to end up like Boeing. It's not just the accidents that I am referring to. It's a lack of oversight and concern for the railroad's constant capitulation to outside pressures that are creating the biggest dangers. I am not sounding the alarm here. I am screaming into the bullhorn for help. If left unchecked, it's my members who will end up maimed or killed, and it is America whose supply chain will end up collapsed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to your questions.
Bingo.
Thank you very much.
Bingo. Who's next? I want to hear Defazio, just because he's funny.
We'll move now on to member questions. Each member will be recognized for 5 minutes, and I'll start by recognizing myself.
Yeah. Let's hear you, Mr. Payne. What you got? I'm going to have to leave here in a minute, but I'm going to leave the stream up. I've got to go get ready for work.
Mr. Morrison, have your members identified defects that were missed by automated track inspection technology inspecting the same track? And can you share an example?
Oh, yeah. Normally, Emilio Payne does.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. Yes, my members have identified multiple defects that were missed by the track geometry measurement technology. Several examples exist, and I could get your office a list later, but I have examples of broken rails, stripped joints, where the joints rip completely out and it's discontinuance in the rail, just like a broken rail. Tie defects, crossings that were where the train was coming in contact with the crossing. We provided several examples in our lawsuit with BNSF in 2018, and I can provide you with as many more as you want.
Thank you. Mr. Grissom, what are the effects of allowing Carmen only 1/3 of the usual time
1 minute.
to inspect rail cars?
1 minute per rail car. That's impossible.
Employees are pressured to rush the inspection, and they're not doing a proper inspection on the cars or repairs. When you inspect it, you might have to change a brake shoe or go underneath, check the side bearing clearance or clearance on the center plate, and this isn't being allowed because of the pressure from management to get the cars out, to get the train out, to keep everything on schedule. There's not enough time or employees allowed to properly inspect the freight trains.
Yeah,
Mr.
1 minute,
Ferguson,
Emilio.
what are the safety reasons that 2-person crews
1
are
minute per
the
car.
industry standard on Class 1 freight trains?
Well,
No, this is live,
thank you for
Seth.
the
The
question,
link's
sir.
pinned in the comments. if you wanna
Safety
go watch it.
reasons are endless. 2 sets of eyes on the capital locomotive is paramount for the safety of our communities that we operate under. It keeps the trains moving, which helps our supply chain, and of course, it keeps fellow employees safe at all given times.
Thank you. With that, I will yield back and recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me, I want to direct this question to Mr. Bachman. How has automated track inspection technology improved freight rail safety, and how can it be used to help not only in basic safety inspections, but also in potentially identifying security threats to our freight rail network?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. Where, automated track inspection has benefited the industry, specifically in our case, we've
Yeah, I don't
been
know
able,
Bonnie is.
over the last decade plus, been able
These
to
class 1
collect
chicks and dudes
copious
are
amounts of
wild.
data over nearly 500,000 miles worth of track. And, it's the collection of this data and really understanding what the conditions are on the ground that have allowed us to provide, metrics to our customers, the railroads, where they can go out and identify specific areas that need the greatest amount of attention
NS,
and allocate their resources to address.
NS kind of doubled down on one-man crews, and then right after, it's almost like Ferguson knew what she was going to say. Right after Sanborn said something, Ferguson went right in and attacked right back, saying, "Wow, one-man crews." That's the biggest thing of this whole hearing so far.
Condition really across the country. We have been able to get a better understanding of overall tie condition, how ties exist in different environments, and that has really allowed the railroads the opportunity to plan better, to plan smarter, and produce an overall greater quality product. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the response, and Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Gentleman yields back. And now we have Mr. Moulton from Massachusetts for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, after reading all of your testimonies from 4 of you, Mr. Morrison, Mr. Grissom, Mr. Ferguson, Mr. Cawthon, gentlemen, all of you directly called out PSR, Precision Scheduled Railroading, for its deleterious effects on service and drastic cuts to vital personnel. I mean, there's not a single piece of testimony that notes any benefit to PCR whatsoever, which for all intents and purposes appears to strictly benefit the Wall Street shareholders whose pockets are being padded by this change. So for all of you, how have we assembled a panel of industry experts here today, and not a single one of you stands by arguably the biggest labor and financial decision implemented in freight rail in the past quarter century?
He's setting them
How
up.
did we end up here? How did we get out of, how do we end up here, and how do we get out of this mess and return to a functional system that prioritizes service capacity and safety and actually grows volume, actually has customers saying, I want to switch from truck to rail, because not only is it better for the rest of America to get these trucks off the highway, but the railways are actually offering better service. How do we get there?
Yeah, he set them up to blast PSR. Here we go.
Congressman Moulton, thank you for the question. I'll start. This is Cindy Sanborn from Norfolk Southern and representing AAR as well. I have to tell you that in my mind, PSR is a catchphrase for things people don't like about what's going on the railroad. I have to tell you that at Norfolk Southern, we implemented the basic principles of PSR in 2019, and those basic principles are about turning assets, turning rail cars, and not switching them as many places if we don't need to benefit our customers. And as we implemented it in 2019, we actually saw our service being extremely strong, some of the best we've had in many, many years. And then
mic on, mic feedback off, battery low.
And we had the technology of distributed power and more technology on our locomotives than we've had in years, the upgrades the capability of the tractive effort of the locomotives that allowed us to build longer trains. And those two things together allowed us to not need as many people to operate, whether it was train crews or, in fact, we shed about 400 locomotives at Norfolk Southern, so we didn't need as many people to work on locomotives. And then we hit a pandemic. And going into the pandemic, we saw complete industries, think about the automobile industry that went completely to no production whatsoever. We serve that both on the outbound side of finished automobiles and the inbound side on metals and plastics going into making those automobiles. And so then we furloughed as a result of that change in demand. And as we've come out of the pandemic, as we all know, the labor market has changed substantially in terms of the amount of people looking for work versus the number of jobs that are needed. And as I mentioned, our employees got us through the pandemic. and they have worked tirelessly and very diligently. And we are hiring very aggressively to help solve these service issues because we want to grow our business.
Yet they're lobbying in D.C. to get
Sanborn,
rid of
look,
conductors. Man,
employees have a tough job.
I wish I was a female.
I've worked on a
conductor.
railroad track crew before. It's technical work. It's often backbreaking work. They need to know the details of that job. And yet the STB issued an order criticizing Norfolk Southern for a disturbing lack of detail about your plans to improve
I
service,
gotta leave. I gotta
including how many people NS will hire and how you'll do it. I mean, these are obviously challenges. I get it. You're facing challenges, but your employees are doing great work. They're putting it in every day. How come you can't even come up with a detailed plan for how you're going to fix this problem?
Our discussions, our information we provided to the STB was around our hiring
Been doing
plans.
things shady
And
for
if
a
you
long
look at
time,
our
so.
geography, we have 95 hiring locations. If we gave a total number of how many people we wanted to hire, if we didn't have them in the right physical locations, in other words, you could hit that target number, but still not have the right people spread across the different locations, we still wouldn't see service improve. So trying to answer the question is extremely difficult, but rest assured, we have substantial plans and are recruiting
Really?
very diligently. Some locations we're hiring where we have very little difficulty sourcing employees, and some places the job market is extremely tight, and we are having challenges.
What are you doing? What are you doing to address derailments and the fact that these long trains break into much
He
more
is
frequently
drilling in it.
than shorter trains? And the fact that you don't even have sidings to hold these long trains. The yards can't handle them. So cars will wait for days just waiting for a long train because you don't have the locomotives, you don't have the personnel to operate these trains. And then you finally get that train over the road, it breaks in half. And when you finally get it back together and get it to a yard, the yard can't even receive it.
Well, thanks
I
for
mean,
your
tell me that's not a mess.
Thanks for your question. I in the limited time here and in the sake of brevity,
Dip,
I'll
duck,
tell
dodge.
you that if we had to run more trains, we would need even more people than we need today. And
Exactly.
running longer trains is allowing us to more efficiently move what we can move and safely. I do not think the evidence supports that longer trains drive derailments.
Gentleman's
Well,
time.
I would like to look into that further, Mr. Chairman. I
Yeah.
hope we can examine that last
Holy
question
crap.
further.
Wow.
Because I think the exact opposite, that we're seeing more derailments, more train breaks because they are so long. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would be glad to communicate specifically with you about that. If you
Specifically?
have specific questions.
No.
Thank you, and I concur
Public
with,
Thank you, Mr.
public.
Chairman.
I concur with the gentleman from Massachusetts. Next, we will hear from
Yeah.
Mr. Garcia of Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Mr. Grissom. How seriously
Yeah,
do
we have
you
limited time,
think
so I'll find out
that
later.
railroads take fatigue as a safety issue? And how do you think the FRA's new fatigue rule would change things?
For the first part of your question, the railroads are not, I don't believe is taking fatigue at all serious. Let me give you an example on CSX. We have a form called PI 82 where the employees can report unsafe condition. Our members were turning in these PI 82s when they're forced to work 16 hours or even beyond 16 hours. They were telling their managers
Mic
they're
off.
fatigued, they can't even stay awake, they can't perform their job safely. And the managers refused to accept these PI 82s unsafe condition forms. They clearly stated that these are not
Mic on.
safety concern. This is not part of their safety program. And this is what they're continuously telling our members. This just happened on Monday, right when the fatigue report came out. And I can tell you CSX, for one carrier, is not taking it safely. The only thing they get their attention is if it affects their profit. If you hit them in their pocketbook, that's what they take serious. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So a question for Mr. Ferguson. You mentioned in your testimony that radio communication failures are regularly occurring because of the growing lengths of trains. Can you expand on that and also address the real life issues that this creates for a conductor and an engineer? And also, what would happen if this were to occur while the train was blocking a crossing and a crew was unable to communicate?
Yes, Mr. Congressman, thank you. That's an excellent question, and it happens every day out here across all the Class 1 railroads that are dealing with extremely long trains. For instance, I just got a report a few minutes ago. There's a train operating across the state of Missouri that's just over 21,000 foot long.
Holy
So
cow.
that's 3 of our typical trains, let's just say 3 times 7,000, right? So when you're trying to put that train together, or you have a crossing that you have to cut, and that means separate the railroad cars that are blocking the highway grade crossing, the conductor has to communicate with the head end where the engineer is to move the cars and the train back and forth to get everything situated. And the radios that we're carrying as trainmen, as conductors, can't stretch over 2 miles in most instances, and some even less, depending on what the weather and the
21.
other
He did say
atmospheric
21,000
conditions
feet.
are. So that creates a very unsafe condition. And if you get the equipment moving and then you need to
Train's
stop
almost
it
4
suddenly,
miles long.
you can't get that message relayed to the head end. If you're in a yard operation, management will tell our crews to have somebody relay it, have a yard master relay.
All right, I get ready for work. I'm leaving this
Everybody's
on,
too
but I'm gonna
busy,
cut
there's
camera
too
stuff
much
off.
radio chatter going on, there's
I'll be
too many
back in
other
here in a
things
second before I leave.
that are, interfering with the safe operation of that specific move, and it
Mic
can
off.
become very catastrophic very quickly, especially if the train is 3 to 4 miles long. That is insanity. So it jeopardizes not only our safety, but the communities that we have to operate through, and when we're stopped and we have to separate equipment across grade crossings.
Okay, thank you. And just a rapid fire question to Mr. Grissom, Mr. Ferguson, Mr. Morrison. Each of you mentioned important outstanding safety issues that need to be addressed by the FRA. What is something that the FRA can do to address a concern you raise in your testimony? In real brief, please.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. I'd like to start if it's possible. As we said, I'd say the biggest thing that FRA could do is start enforcing the regulations on manager disqualification for knowingly violating whistleblower protections. We've been asking the FRA to look at those regulations and implement them in an industry that is known for its retaliatory behavior and making it hard on workers. If
Thank
that
you.
were,
Anyone else? Because my time's almost up.
Yeah, I'd like to add, just to have the FRA show up more and enforce the regulations and don't tip off management before they come on the property, so they get a true picture of what's the day-to-day operation.
Thank you, sir. And I think my time is up. So, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Tim. His time has expired. Now we have the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with my the comments from my colleagues on the length of the trains, because that's one issue that I've had along in my area. But Ms. Sanborn, I've been long concerned about grade crossing safety and block crossings. The statement from the Association of State Railroad Safety Managers describes the harmful safety impact of block crossings. But they also say some railroads are requiring local municipalities to pay maintenance fees for various grade crossing improvement projects, resulting in delay, canceling, or scaling back a project intended to enhance grade crossing safety. These maintenance fees have long been paid for by the railroads, but now, shortly after Congress made available billions in grants to support grade crossing improvement projects, railroads are trying to pass the buck. We should be working together to improve the grade crossing safety, not creating more obstacles. And why are the railroads now having governments pay for these maintenance fees? And can your company and AAR look into this and please reverse the trend?
I'm sorry, I could not quite understand what you were saying. If somebody else did, I'm happy to hear them help me understand better what you just asked me. I just couldn't hear you.
Well, it has to do with the rail crossings and the grade crossing improvements. Prior to this, the railroads took care of it, the maintenance fees, and now they're asking the communities to pay for it. But shortly after, Congress made available billions in grants to support them. And why are the railroads now having governments pay for these maintenance fees And can your company and AAR look into it and please reverse the trend?
Yeah, so as far as road crossing maintenance fees, we pay for the operation of the crossing once it's installed. And if there's some specific questions that you have, Congresswoman Napolitano, I'll be happy to look further. I'm not that conversant on the issue that you're bringing up specifically, but we'll get back to you with an answer.
Well, there certainly is a problem, and I agree with my colleagues' comments that the railroads are making profits for Wall Street, and the communities are suffering. And we need to be sure that we back the employees because and as far as the whistleblowers are concerned, maybe we should make more availability to them to tell us what is going wrong so we can take action. And I know that the railroads have autonomy over much of what happens on the land, but it's important that we provide more safety for the employees. I know in my area, there are many employees of the railroad, and sometimes they come to me with some of the issues that they feel are important for their safety, but we don't have enough input to be able to take action on them.
To your point, I would agree that and involve myself in listening to employees. In fact, in the last 30 days, I've been in Roanoke, Virginia, Cincinnati, Ohio, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'll be in the yard in Atlanta here and on Thursday, and listening to our employees and what they have to say around safety and concerns that they have. I think that there's general frustration that they would like to see the railroad operate better. They feel better when the railroad operates better, and we absolutely want to do that, both from a safety perspective and serving our customers as well. I would also say that part of the solution is hiring, and we are very aggressively hiring and need our existing employees that are working the jobs today to help train new employees. And this is across all crafts. This is not just T&E. And to your point around crossings and paying for things, I think I'd like to make this point. We compete across many areas. We compete in service. There are alternatives to using our service. We compete in terms of cost to be able to be the most efficient and effective as we can so we can charge a reasonable price for our service. And we compete from the standpoint of capital markets and having access to those capital markets by having shareholders buy our stock. So, and all three areas are very important areas for us to be effective and efficient and serve our customers, with the overall umbrella constantly being safety. And we want to grow our business. We feel that we're very climate friendly. We know we're very climate friendly. We offer our customers an opportunity to reduce their carbon footprint. And only can we do that if we're able to provide a very, very good service. And it takes our employees to do that. If it weren't for them, we would not have a business. So I think we are aligned in many areas. I think frustrations might exist as well. But thank you for your questions.
I'd like to be able to connect with you later because there are many other points that I'd like to bring forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. We'll now have the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing, and thank the second panel of witnesses for your testimony today. Workforce cuts by Class 1 railroads have decimated their workforces by a third of their size since 2015. And what's especially shocking is that this cutting of the labor force predates the pandemic. To date, rail companies have failed to rehire previously furloughed workers, leading to labor shortages on many rail lines. Mr. Grissom and Mr. Morrison, do you think harsh and unduly challenging working conditions play a role in workers deciding not to return to the workforce, such as forced overtime, heavier workloads, and management pressure to circumvent safety?
Yes, thank you for the question, and you are correct. We saw this problem before the pandemic, and one of the issues is the railroads, they'll furlough somebody, they'll be furloughed for a year or two, call them back, they may work another year or two, then get laid off again.
And people are just sick and tired of being a part-time employee, and they're just in dilemma during the part of the furlough. And so you're right about the conditions and the intimidation and not being respected as an employee at work. This is what we're hearing from our members, and we're seeing employees with 20, 25 years into the rare retirement system, and we got a unique rare retirement system where you can have 30 years at age 60 and fully retire. And we're seeing people with 20, 25 years of service walking off the job.
And they're not coming back because of the work conditions that are in existence at this time. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it's just they don't feel safe at work. They just don't feel like they're taking safety serious. The fatigue.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Mr. Morrison, what do you think about it?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Congressman. This is a great topic. Yeah, the conditions our members are being forced to work in right now are just catastrophic. And a lot of them, yes, the work is hard, and yes, it's taxing on our members and it's taking physical tolls, but also our members are very professional in what they do. And we have members also walking away from the industry because of what they see this automated track inspection is doing. They don't feel safe as a track inspector, and they don't feel that the railroads are giving them the tools that they need to keep that railroad track safe. So,
well, let me ask you this question. What types of changes to working conditions would be needed to encourage workers to remain on the job or return to the job?
So for the maintenance of way employees, I mean, yes, hiring and getting more people out there is absolutely critical. Now, the railroads don't value their employees like they say they do. They're not. We're in negotiations right now, so they're not really keeping the industry as good of a job as it used to be, and it's a highly hostile workforce. You know, it's the only industry I know of where our members actually purchase insurance for when they get fired to help get them through the process of going through the investigation and to try to get back, which might take up to 2 years.
Yeah, let me ask this question, Ms. Sanborn. In recent years, trains have been growing consistently longer, with lengths now reaching more than 3 miles. What factors, Ms. Sanborn, are evaluated when determining how long a train should be? And would you agree that the decision-making process is primarily driven by cost factors rather than safety?
I will tell you that our decisions around train size and how we plan for that are created on needs of service for our customers and how can we move that freight most efficiently. And train size does play a factor in it, but and any time we operate a train of a different type or longer train on a geography that we haven't before, we do simulations to ensure that it can be done safely.
Well, you're trying to get as much money as you can out of each shipment, and so that's why train lengths have gotten longer. Isn't that correct?
As like I mentioned before, just real briefly, we compete in service, we compete in cost to make an effective service, to be able to charge a decent price. So there are a number of reasons that we get the benefits of longer trains and can then handle more business because we compete more effectively in that way.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time.
I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. We're next here from the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Auchincloss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. As we begin to inject billions into our nation's infrastructure, including, of course, rail, no project will be able to get off the ground without a workforce. Railroading is a 24/7 operation, frequently requiring odd working hours and unpredictable schedules. The average total number of workers employed by the Class 1 railroads at the end of 2021 was nearly 1/3 less than the total employed in 2015, according to data reported by the railroads and published by the Surface Transportation Board. For both Mr. Ferguson and Mr. Grissom, you've testified that workers are leaving the industry because of worsening conditions on the job. As workers leave the railroads and aren't being replaced by new hires, what effect is that having on the workload for the people still there? And Mr. Ferguson, you can begin.
Yes, Mr. Congressman, thank you. What it's doing to the existing workforce is basically unbearable. They put forth these draconian attendance policies. They want more out of the workforce they have today, and it's making their family life, their work life, every part of it unbearable because they're so shorthanded. If you are home, if you are fortunate enough to get time with your family, the phone is constantly ringing once you become rested under the hours of service. They don't have enough people to adequately staff the other trains that you're technically not responsible for, so they're going to constantly ring your phone. That may be in the middle of the night while you're trying to get sleep for when you're going to go to work on your regular scheduled job.
And then jumping in there for Mr. Grissom, to that point, are workers being expected to take on more shifts and potentially work while fatigued or in unsafe conditions?
Yes, they're required to stay over. So we normally, like you said, we're 24/7, 3 shifts, first, second, third shift. So if you're working second shift from 3 to 11, you're thinking you're going to get off 11 o'clock tonight. But if there's not enough people for third shift, you're going to be forced. It's a requirement. You're going to stay over and perform another shift. So you're going to be there 16 hours. And when you get there, you don't know if you're going to work 8 hours or 16 hours or 24 hours or when you're going to get home. And you don't know how to pack a lunch because you can't leave the property to, go through McDonald's drive-through. You're stuck on that property with no food. That's another issue we have.
Understood. And switching gears to Mr. Cawthon, your testimony describes a regression in the management of in-train forces, identifying 5 types of recurring incidents that demonstrate the problem: improperly sequencing cars within a train, lack of appropriate locomotive power, brake lines that are too long to function properly, failure to account for possible loss of communication throughout a train, and relying on onboard systems inappropriately. If in-train forces is as old as railroading, why are these problems happening?
Well, I try not to go to head-to-head with the railroad operating officer because they're pretty tough and very knowledgeable. But the fact of the matter is that, number one, traditionally this was a matter handled by the railroads themselves and pretty well. There were still lapses and the railroad would report. The train makeup was the cause of the accident. And indeed, we're still getting reports of train makeup as cause of the accident. Sometimes it's improper use of dynamic brakes, but the underlying cause is the train was not manageable by the crew, given its composition. The more you take a block of cars and add another block of cars sequentially at different locations to aggregate the cars into the most efficient train, the less likely it is that train is going to be made up correctly in terms of the management of in-train forces, and that's what's going on.
Mr. Cawthon, I'm going to interject there. Thank you for the response. I do want to give Ms. Sanborn the final minute just to respond to the comments thus far.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Let me talk about in-train forces. We have a lot of technology has come along that has been very beneficial to us to handle longer trains very efficiently and safely. Distributed power is an example of that. Energy management systems that are basically cruise control systems that help operate the train with an eye towards managing in-train forces as well as speed and fuel efficiency. And I would tell you that we have operating rules that give us and have a very clear understanding of trailing tonnage and specifics around how the train is made up, whether there's end-of-car cushioning devices.
But these accidents are still happening. They're still happening.
What's happening?
The accidents are still happening at an increasing rate, and so it calls into question the new technologies and their efficacy to the problems at hand.
I think the technology is enhancing our operation to make it more safe, and I think the technology will continue to do that, both from a standpoint of train build and train marshaling, and we are continuing to improve in the visibility of that for not just the next station, but the entire route of the train.
Yielding back, Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. That concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank each of the witnesses for your testimony today. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The subcommittee stands adjourned.